beautiful homemakers. In an old book I came across the short story Christmas in the Piney Woods by Charlie May Simon. She lived from 1897 to 1977. If you like Little House books, I think you'll enjoy this story. All day on Christmas Eve it had been raining, making a pattering sound on the roof, beating against the window, and trickling through the rag of a quilt stuffed in the broken pane. The ruts became puddles big enough for the ducks to splash around in. It was raining inside, too, fast filling up the tub on the floor with little drops that came from a leak in the roof. One of the beds had to be moved closer to the middle of the room. Melissa stood on tiptoe, pressing her nose against the pane, looking out at the tall pines rocking this way and that. The chickens were huddled together in the shed, and the calf leaned over the fence of the lot and bawled for his mamma. Papa put on his jumper and went out in the rain to get more wood for the fire. "Will Santa Claus come tonight in all this rain?" Melissa asked, turning to her mamma, who sat by the fire churning. Mamma smiled gently. "I'm afraid not, honey. I'm afraid he'd have a right hard time making the crossing." "Is that child at it again?" Papa said, coming through the doorway with his arms loaded with wood. "I declare she's getting plumb worrisome here lately." Christmas had meant little to Melissa until this year, when Lige decided to take his cotton to the big city where it would bring a better price. He took Melissa and her mommy, Martha, with him. What fun they had, sitting in the wagon yard, eating their lunch from the tin lard bucket and watching the many people and automobiles pass. Later they walked up and down Main Street, looking in at the gay windows of the stores. There was a Christmas tree in one of the windows, bright and shining, and Melissa had wanted to stand long and look. They went inside the store, and while Papa and Mamma were buying flour and sugar and baking soda, Melissa saw a doll in a box. It had short yellow hair and eyes that opened and shut, and when she picked it up it gave a little cry. She held it close, and her heart was bursting with joy. "Look here, little one," the storekeeper said, coming toward her. "Those toys are not to be handled." He took the doll from her and put it in the box, but when he turned around and looked at her, he smiled. "Never mind. Maybe Santa Claus will have one for you in his pack of toys this Christmas." And he gave her a card with a picture of Santa Claus on it, in a red suit and a white beard and a jolly laugh, looking for all the world like old Daddy Hawkins, who played the fiddle and sang songs at the play parties. And ever after that, to this day, Melissa had been worrying her mamma, asking how many days more until Christmas. After the supper things were done, and the fire was low, Mamma put some sweet potatoes in the ashes, and some black-eyed peas in the iron pot over the fire. On a string from the mantel she hung a chicken that Papa had killed and plucked. The heat of the fire turned the chicken around and around, so that by morning it would be roasted a golden brown. "And because tomorrow's Christmas," Mamma said, "we'll have a blackberry cobbler pie, and I'll open a jar of watermelon rind preserves." Then they all washed their feet in the tin washpan by the fire and got into bed. No sooner had she fallen asleep, it seemed, than Melissa was awakened by a gentle shake. "Wake up, little one," her papa was saying. "Mamma is feeling puny, and I'm bound to hitch up old Beck and fetch the granny woman." Melissa rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and started to get up. "You don't have to get up. Just watch over your mamma and don't bother her. I'll be back directly." He put some pine knots on the ashes and built up a roaring fire. Then he went outside. The fire flickered and cast queer shadows on the newspaper-covered walls. The chicken on the string turned fast and furiously, and the peas in the pot boiled loudly. Melissa got up and raked out the sweet potatoes and dragged the iron pot onto the hearth, and she tied a knot in the string to hang the chicken higher. Mamma looked pale and gaunt, with her dark hair hanging loose over her shoulders, and her eyes were closed, but Melissa knew she was not sleeping. She wanted to get in bed with her mamma and put her arms around her and kiss her tired cheeks, but Papa had said she must not be bothered, so Melissa got into her own bed and lay quietly waiting. Gusts of wind blew through the cracks of the wall. Melissa lay in the darkness, getting up from time to add more pine knots to the fire. Finally, after long hours of waiting, a rooster crowed, and the hound dog stirred from his bed under the house, rubbing against the floorboards as he moved. Directly, Melissa heard the pattering of hoofs, and before she could slip her dress on over her petticoat, Lige came into the room. Behind him was the granny woman, her hair stringing down under her hat and her full skirts dripping with water. She nodded to Mamma and went over by the fire to dry, shivering and rubbing her rough old hands together. Papa bent down over Mamma and kissed her gently on the forehead, as Melissa had wanted to do. The granny woman began to step around briskly. She sent Papa out to the woods to fetch some bark from the north side of a red oak and some black haw roots to brew a tea. "And you, Melissa, put on a kettle of water to boil," she said. Melissa had to draw fresh water from the well, as there was none in the water bucket. It splashed on her bare feet and made her toes ache with cold as she poured it into the iron kettle. And when Papa brought back the herbs, he said to Melissa, "Come, little one, Granny can do for your mamma, and you and I will go out and get us some Christmas fixings." Melissa wanted to stay, but her papa made her put on her shoes, and he wrapped Mamma's big coat around her. The sleeves flapped down over her hands, and the bottom came down to her feet, so that she had to hold it high to keep from stumbling. The old hound dog started after them, then turned back to look at the house, and stayed where he was. The mules, tethered to the post oak in the front yard, were still nervous and wet from swimming the swollen creek. Lige led them to the barn and fed them some corn. The speckled hen that slept under the house clucked, and her 10 half-grown chickens came running after her and pecked at each grain the mules dropped. All the stars had disappeared except one, which shone down on them brighter than ever. "Don't you reckon we'd best be getting on back now?" Melissa asked, turning back to the little cabin on the hillside. It looked bare and alone. The flowers and lard buckets on the porch shelf were drooping and brown, and the rambler bush clung to the chimney with cold, bare branches. Lige reached out and picked some scarlet berries from a haw bush. "Folks out yonder in the lowlands use this stuff to keep Christmas. They hang it with holly and mistletoe in their windows, and it makes the room right pretty and gay." He picked branches of the berries and gave them to Melissa. Then he carried her high on his shoulders to the sycamore tree behind the barn, and Melissa reached up and picked the mistletoe that was clinging fast to the trunk. The little black pig, looking for an early morning breakfast, followed behind them, making a long furrow in the soft mud with his nose. "And now take your mistletoe and haw berries to the cotton shed," Papa said. "Then go to the potato house and fetch some peanuts and popcorn and get some pine cones from the ground. We'll have as fine a Christmas as ever a body could have. I'll be back directly." He strode off to the house with long steps. The early morning air was cold, and Melissa was shivering, and her nose and fingers were red when Papa came back. He seemed worried, like he might turn gruff at any minute, until he looked down at Melissa. "Why, you're freezing, little one. Why didn't you say something? Here, I'll build us a fire." When the fire was roaring and warm, and they were seated close to it under the cotton shed, Papa shelled some popcorn and popped it in the iron skillet he had brought back with him. Then he took a needle and thread from his jumper pocket and showed Melissa how to string the peanuts and popcorn. It was such a pretty string, and the fire was so warm and comfortable, that Melissa almost forgot why she had that queer little ache in her heart. She looked out over the long, even rows of cotton plants, now bare and brown, and bent down by the winter wind. It seemed long ago when they were tiny little green things, and she had helped weed them with her hoe. Mamma was with them then, laughing and funning, and making believe Melissa could chop twice as many weeds as she or Papa. Melissa wanted to say to her Papa that she had changed her mind about keeping this Christmas. She didn't care any more about the doll that could open and shut its eyes and cry. All she wanted now was to be with her Mamma, to feel her sturdy arms about her again. She started to get up and run to the house, but Lige held her firmly by the hand. "Not yet, little one." He led her to the Piney Woods, where he gathered branches of holly, and he cut down a young cedar. And again they sat by the fire under the cotton shed, and tied gay bunches of holly and mistletoe and red hawberries, one for each of the windows and some for the doors. Papa sang as they worked, old songs he had learned from his grandmother many years ago, when he was a little one. Melissa's lips trembled, and she tried hard to keep the tears back from her eyes. Directly they heard the granny woman yell for them, and Papa took Melissa up in his arms and walked with long steps toward the house. It didn't look so lonesome now, somehow. The smoke curled in big clouds from the chimney, and the granny woman's voice was heard inside crooning and chuckling. Melissa ran straight to the bed, and her heart warmed to see her Mamma smile at her. At her side was a baby, tiny and red, and squinting at her. "Look, honey," Mamma said, pointing to the baby. "Santa Claus did bring you a doll that closes its eyes and cries." "Is it mine?" Melissa asked. "All yours," Mamma replied. Melissa held out her arms. The end. Hope you enjoyed that little story. Bye.